Fern, we are back. Best hour of their day. We are taking off. People are loving the show.
It's been fun and I don't think people have an idea of like there's some pretty awesome folks that are going to be on the podcast in the coming weeks.
Yeah, you and I know everyone that's coming on, but I think a big one. Should we let people know who you'll be chatting with later in the week?
I mean, we've already gotten requests for it, so we might as well put it out there. But I am going to sit down and chat with the Chuck Carswell.
The Chuck Carswell. He's going to be a great interview. He
I can't wait.
and he's just someone everyone loves. I just talked to Coach Bergner earlier today, and I said, "Man, you are just someone everyone loves, and I think it's because you're old. Like you get to a certain, but you get to a certain age and people love you. Chuck's not old. I mean, granted, he's going to be 50 this year.
He is going to be 50 this year.
People just love him because who he is.
Yeah, he's just I think there's no shortage of people in the CrossFit community that remember their level one. And then right after they were like, I took my level one, their next statement was like, Chuck was the flow and Chuck's the man.
You'll talk about it with him, but he's coming up on his 500th seminar.
That is just mind blowing. I can't even wrap my brain around that.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, we're going to kick off this podcast, but beforehand, I always like to give thanks to the people that are leaving us reviews on Apple. And this one comes from Corey B73. Best hour of their day is awesome. The two Jasons are a wealth of knowledge. Whether you're an athlete, box owner, or coach, give them a listen. You will not be disappointed. So thank you, Corey B.
And we'll try not to disappoint.
Yeah, we will do our best. I don't think we're going to disappoint this week. We're talking about on-ramps. Also, whatever you want to call them, fundamentals, boot camps. What else have you heard?
Athlete intake. And like the point is, I don't think it matters what you call it. It's just like how you bring athletes into the fold of your gym is the topic for today. And largely, we're going to try to keep this to why it's important from a coaching standpoint, but we have to understand that these things are not mutually exclusive. Like this does affect the business, but it also has overlap with regard to how that affects the coaches on the floor. So you can't really separate the two. They're not independent of each other.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you'll get from the two of us is we've probably tried it all. I mean, granted, you can always create a new way, but when I say all, personally, we did a 0 day, meaning, hey, welcome to CrossFit. Here's Fran. We did a 1 day, which we try to cram every movement into an hour. And typically that led to the coach going far more than an hour. We also did 3, 6, and 12 day. So
and I've done, and so when you did those 3, 6, and 12 day was over what time frame?
It was a little different for each one. The one that was the most regimented was the 12 day. So the 12 day, this was years ago, but I believe we did like Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. and it started just once a month, so it was
4 weeks. Yep.
4 weeks of 3 times a week. And the 6 day was similar. It was just every other week versus monthly. And
I've seen this. Go ahead.
I have my opinions on all of them, and I'm certainly willing to give them, and we will. But what options have you tried?
I've tried all of those, and I've seen as high as 8 and 12 weeks for people that have done this.
12 weeks.
So long. I mean, that's 3 months. So.
And that's where we talk about. There's, I think if you're an affiliate owner, and I know for me, the downfall to that 12 sessions over the month is you look at it and you're like, well, what if someone wants to sign up today and they have to wait 3 weeks? So that's certainly something to consider. But, on that far end, they're coming into your box and joining classes as a much smarter, better moving athlete.
Correct. And I think you and I will agree here. I don't know that there is a way to do it. I think that how you do that continually morphs over time based on a couple different factors. One, what does your business look like? And then 2, what do your coaches look like? Because those 2 things matter. You may be in a position from a business standpoint that, hey, come on in here, sign up is what needs to happen. like you might be in a position where, hey, listen, I need to bring in revenue and I need members, I need butts and seats right now. And that's okay.
Or depending how long you've been open. So for example, that 12-week, 1 month version I did at Albany CrossFit when we had, about 500 members. And at that point, I needed people coming into classes smart because I had 30 in a class and they had been going around a while. So I can't break down, the air squat to everyone. However, I then opened another affiliate, CrossFit Soulshine, and that was, in 2013. I had people join and start that same day because they were all new. So
yeah. So, but going back to what I said earlier, I think what is important about this is, regardless of how you do it, it should be done with intent. Meaning, I'm doing it this way because of these factors, because that's what needs to happen based on what's going on with the business, and then what is my coaching staff capable of handling based on the athletes that are on the floor. So I think you have to look at all of those because it'll morph over time. And I would argue that if it doesn't morph over time and you don't change it and you're not revamping it, that's, in my opinion, probably signs of some stagnant coaching or stagnant business.
Yeah, anything you're doing should be at least evaluated, and you can evaluate it and find out it's going great. But that same place that I did the 12 sessions, Albany CrossFit, where I've had James, the head coach, on a couple times, they now do 2 weeks. So they clearly took a look at things and made a change to it. So let's first look at time frame. If we look at time frame, one thing I learned in that was the longer people committed to it, the longer they stayed at CrossFit. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I would probably be in the middle because I've seen it both ways. I've seen people, that have bought memberships on a Groupon that are some of our, we did a Groupon, probably 7 or 8 years ago before I realized that was just a really horrific idea. And those are some of our best members. So, I think it kind of depends. But I would probably agree with you that on average, the longer the intake process, within reason, probably has a better rate of retention.
And some options, one thing that worked well for us was we had 2 locations at that time. So although they were a 1-month program, you can start them every other week. You just might have to go to a different location that would become your norm. But if you're running a box and you wanted to go that longer route, you can have 2 going on at once. You can have a morning session and an evening session. So someone doesn't have to wait 3 weeks potentially to get going with CrossFit.
Yeah. So let's talk about timeframes, but then I want to talk about kind of pros and cons of each and one of those, because I think that is kind of what allows somebody to make a decision, which variation of this should I use. So let's go shortest to longest. So we have somebody comes in, we do no on-ramp. We're like, sign up today, they're in. Give me some of the pros and cons of that.
All right. Pros, money in your pocket day one.
Yep.
Right? Let's go back and forth maybe. Cons, rhabdo.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got that, and that's a bit of a far-fetched, but, injury. The risk of injury is higher. Pro, you're just, goes back to that money. You're just getting people in your box. If someone is told there are people that it's like, okay, I got off my couch today. Today's the day. Sorry, you have to wait 3 weeks. They're either going back to the couch or finding another box that'll have them tomorrow. Because you need to it's like any sales. The faster you can respond, the more likely you are to get it.
Correct.
Now, the con, and I think the obstacle I should say to that is you need to be a really good coach.
I agree with wholeheartedly.
So when I owned CrossFit Soulshine, so let's use it, because that's a more recent version of this and more real world scenario. When I owned it, it was me and my partner. We coached 100% of the classes. We only have 3 or 4 a day. So we were bringing the energy and we were following .com at the time, 1 workout a day, and we were coaching the hell out of it. So it didn't matter if you had 10 years or it was your first day, and you had to really know how to scale, right? Go back and listen to our scaling episode. But if you didn't know how to scale, you were going to fail there. When I did it originally at Albany CrossFit, it was just because it was more of that, I need money. I'm not going to tell someone not to pay. But as soon as it got big enough, I realized something needed to change because these guys couldn't hop into classes. And there were times where someone would walk in at 2:00 in the afternoon and I would put them through a workout just because I was there and I wanted them to sign up. So those are really, I think, the bigger pros and cons. Can you think of anything else associated with that hop on in mentality?
It can be problematic for the coach, but I think people forget that it can also be problematic for member experience. So the other members in the gym who've been there a while are not going to get the attention that they were getting before this new person walked in. So let's say that we've used Amanda before as an example. Let's use Amanda again as an example, because that's something you're probably going to see on a fairly frequent basis in a gym, but those are two very technical movements. I have a muscle up and a snatch, 975, not high volume, but technical movements. If I've got a class full of people that have been there for, let's call it 6 months to 4 years, most of them are probably familiar with what progressions we use, what the logistical layout of the class is, and that should lend itself to a person assimilating fairly quickly. But I'm going to have to spend a lot more time with this new person who has never been in a set of rings, has no idea what a snatch is. They're thinking about a Brad Pitt movie or something like that. And I'm going to have to devote a lot of time and energy to this person, therefore ignoring some of the athletes. And that's going to be even for a seasoned coach, because I have to make sure this person moves safely. So it's not just that person potentially has a bad experience and potentially gets injured, but all of the other people in the class. And they're not mad at that person. They're just not getting the attention that they came for.
And let's also add to that, that could potentially wind up costing you a member because they might not enjoy it. They don't understand. Say they're doing Amanda, and we know that that's hard. It's 2 high skill movements, but it's also somewhat of a burner. Can we scale it well enough that they still get that stimulus? Just off the top of my head, I'm like, all right, what would I do? I'd probably do a very light power snatch.
Yep.
And even though Amanda's a squat snatch, just because they're not ready for that. And I'm talking light, like PVC, empty bar. And I would probably do some sort of burpee jumping pull-up. And that's going to, even a very deconditioned person, it's going to take them probably 3 minutes or less.
Right? Are you still using the 975 for that?
Yeah, I'll still go 975. But, that's even just those 2 movements. If someone's never done it, that's taking a lot of my bandwidth. Now, we could talk about if you have an assistant in class, you give it to them, but that creates a whole new scenario. I think this day and age in CrossFit, the joint class is a very hard way to get people going.
It just creates a lot of problems, and I agree. The linchpin in that scenario is the coach on the floor. Do they have the skill set and experience to manage that fairly seamlessly? A new coach is going to fall on their face.
How many athletes do you need to have the capacity to coach to handle that? Or how many years of experience do you think it takes to get there?
I mean, you need to have a couple thousand hours of coaching, I think, in order to facilitate what I would consider a good, efficiently run lesson plan where everybody still has a good time and nobody really notices that the new person is in the class.
Yeah. Or else it just turns into, hey guys, you go warm up your snatch. I'm working with Susie over here.
Correct.
So
okay.
That's 0 day. Let's break this down to basically a 3 day. You want to go 3 day?
Yeah, let's go from the 1 day to the 3 day, because we used to do that as well. So we used to go, we've done 1 intro session. We've done no intro sessions.
So that was,
let's go 1 day.
Yeah, that was 0.
So let's go 1 day. Let's go 1 day.
All right. Same thing, pros and cons. What do you think?
So pro, again, is very similar to the first one, which is very quick conversion.
That could still be day of, right? A lot, for a lot of boxes, what that looks like is one-on-one.
Yeah, and we do a version of that now. So I'm speaking from a lot of experience here. So the pro is quick conversion, right? So I may not get them signed up the first day, but it's going to be for sure the second day. Cons is I'm going to meet with this person. I'm probably going to give them far too much information in that one-on-one session, at which point this does bring up the argument, what is the point of this? Like, why am I doing this 1 hour thing? And what am I doing? Now, context matters. What I'm doing in the hour matters. But I will tell you what we typically did in the past, which is in that 1 hour, I'm going to teach you all 9 foundational movements, which is somebody trying to drink Lake Michigan in one gulp. It's just nobody can retain that amount of information. Like, most people don't retain it in the 2 days that we give it for the level 1 course, much less all of it in 1 hour.
And that's a really good way to look at it. If you're listening and you've taken your level 1, how much of that did you retain, a week later? And if you did, was it because you continued to read, continued to study, started coaching? Speaking of Boz last week, that was actually what he said is the biggest mistake coaches make is too much. He says he to be a beginner all the time, and he started jiu-jitsu, and he's like, man, if I learn 2 or 3 things, I'm like, that's it. And I've probably forgotten one of them on the way to my car. So while it's better than nothing, I would say that one day is you're better off just having them sign up to join.
There's a strong argument for that. And this is coming from a guy who we currently do that. But again, I think what you do in the hour matters.
What you do, and you're also, in fairness, cultivating a relationship with the coach. You're removing a little bit of that barrier of intimidation. They've worked out now, which may have been their first workout in 3 months or 3 years. So certainly it does. Well, if we're on it, then what does that 1 hour look like for you?
So that 1 hour is for me, not for them. And I tell them that on the front end. It's not going to be hard. We're not going to do a workout. It is largely for me to assess the athlete move. So I want to see, do they have any injuries? Do they have any restrictions in their movement? Generally, what does their range of motion look like? We're going to do the 3 baseline movements. I'm going to have them show me some air squats. I'm going to have them press overhead. I'm going to have them do a deadlift. We're going to do a little bit of a kettlebell swing test just to see what kind of hip function they have. I'll do some overhead pulling tests just to see what capacity they have with pull-ups, and I'll have them row a 500-meter row, and not at 100%. It's 80 to 90%. All of that gives me a snapshot of what I need to know to tell the rest of the coaching staff basically what level of athlete is coming into the class. But nobody walks away from that session expecting to remember anything. And I tell them, listen, this is for me. It's not for you. We're going to teach you everything in the class, but I need to know some basic things about you and your movement and what you're afraid of and all of those things before I put you into a class. But then I need to convey that to the coaching staff so they have some idea about who this person is.
And that's what Coach Glassman used to say too. He'd put people on a bike, I think at the time, and say that's basically him assessing them. He's talking to them. If they're getting out of breath, he knows he needs to be aware of that. And then something you brought up that's really smart, and we probably could do a whole episode on it, is just communication with your crew. This is only valuable if you then, Fern goes in, whether it's text or Slack or your, Facebook group, whatever you use, to say, hey, Susie just joined today. Here are her limitations. Be aware of that. And that's, the box I'm at currently, North Naples CrossFit, they do 3 one-on-one sessions, which we can dive into next. But it's the same thing. After they're done, we get a text. They're probably going to be in these classes, so these coaches be aware. And here is what they're, sometimes it's like they're really fit. They're going to be going out of good. But sometimes it's like, hey, this person's like a soup sandwich. Be ready.
Yeah, and that's it. And the report, if you will, I'll call it a report, but it's a very simple kind of blast that goes out to everybody. It's the person's name, age, which location they're probably going to be going to, and if I can find out what class they'll be at, I'll probably put that in there too. I'll put any injury history they have, what their goals are if we've gotten that far in the session, and then things that I saw. Like, so if, for instance, if I put them on the 500-meter row and it takes them 3.5 minutes to do the 500-meter row, when I put that in there, if you're listening to this and you've been coaching for any amount of time, that gives you a pretty good idea of what level of condition a person is coming in at.
Also,
go ahead.
Also, how athletic they are. You see someone
Yeah.
get on that thing, and the chains flopping everywhere, and they're pulling early, and they don't know what to do with their limbs. That's an indication too.
Yeah. So I'll put, any information if they have some sort of connection or relationship with somebody else in the gym, so that the rest of the coaches can have that link to reference when they come into class. And then basically what we've got is like a level 1, level 2, and level 3 as far as their experience level. Level 1 being the least, level 3 being the most. And again, it's not intended to be all inclusive, but it is intended to give somebody enough information so that when Jason walks into my 9 a.m. class, that I didn't do that one-on-one session with him, I got the blast, and I know that you've been CrossFitting for 5 years. You snatched 225 and you casually rode a 130/500. I'm like, okay, I could pretty much dial this up today.
So while we're on this subject, let's talk pricing. Obviously it's going to be relative to what your box charges. Is that part of their first month, or do they pay a fee just for that one-on-one session?
We've done it both ways. We currently do not charge for that session. It's included in their membership.
So, but they've joined, they've paid, whatever your current monthly rate is. And I think that's the way to go. Keep it simple. Like your member, someone walks in, we let them know they're going to do a one-on-one session, put it in the calendar. They have to pay to reserve it. Your membership doesn't, if it's a week out, your membership won't start till then. You should be able to set that in whatever system you have. And there you go. Now they're all already on recurring memberships and committed.
I think that's important. And to go to the other side, if you are charging them for it, then for me, it becomes a little bit of a value question. How much value was I really able to add to this person? Not how much actual value, how much perceived value, because that matters. So I may have given them a ton of information, which, somebody who knows what's going on is like, dude, you gave them a lot of information in an hour. But for that person who doesn't know any better, they're just thinking to themselves, well, he watched me move and do some stuff, but like, that was it. So I want to provide some value on the front end before I actually collect any dollars.
And connect. I think that's something we definitely want to hit on. Like if you're doing one-on-ones, you need to be a great personality because you need to bring energy. But it's also a great place if you're new to coaching, if you're listening to this and you've just finished your level 1, that might be a great place for you to start. One-on-one, like Coach Glassman says, starts with one-on-one, then get to 2-on-1. Now you need to be on it because you're also assessing and you're teaching someone to squat for the first time, but it's maybe a little less intimidating than walking into a class of your peers and 15 people.
Now, from a practical standpoint, if you're the business owner or head coach, I think you need to be very careful about who does those fundamentals. 100%. I would say that largely those should be your better coaches. If the newer coaches need to get in there and assist, that's great. I think it is a good opportunity for people to learn in a controlled environment. And that person needs to be okay with sales. So I would definitely not put a new coach in charge of fundamentals because they're going to flop around. And this person who's coming in is clearly going to know that this person is uncomfortable and doesn't really know what they're doing.
Yeah, and from that sales aspect, again, it depends, I suppose, if they've signed up ahead of time versus, you're closing at the end of that. Because, yeah, you need to be confident asking for, $150, $200 at the end of that session. So we go from one day, and here's really the big jump because now we're going from more than just, okay, I show up once and then I can come to any class to I'm making a commitment. I think really from 3 to 6 to 12, it's just a matter of getting them to wait for it. But when they go to 3-day, what do you see some of the difficulties and what are some of the things that make it much better?
So I think one of the difficulties is that there's a barrier to entry. So I've immediately put up a roadblock that this person wants to join, and I tell them you've got to do these things first. And again, it's not always bad. You can do this in a multitude of ways. Those can be a bunch of people in those 3 sessions together, which can make it a little bit better. The other thing that may matter is at this point, for me personally, I think there's probably a line in the sand when I go from one session to increasing the sessions where you may need to charge for that. because now I have a coach on the floor who's going to have to put in multiple hours for this. I need to pay them, so that cost needs to be covered. But I think the charge kind of goes along with the barrier. If I'm charging them for it, I've got a commitment for them to get through these 3 classes. And then we can talk about what the membership's going to look like. And depending on, there's a lot of ways, we're not going to talk about pricing, but you can charge any number of ways for that, up, down, straight across. It doesn't really matter, but that's for you to figure out. But that is where I think the barrier can be, is I'm kind of putting the brakes on somebody who wants to start.
Yeah. And I think another barrier to that is that now we're talking, do you have enough coaches to do this? Right. So, because there's really 2 options. Like you said, it's okay, this 3 sessions, they run every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. Okay, well, that means you probably need a coach for class and a coach for this. Or it's a one-on-one session and we schedule it around you, but now you need a coach available to do that. So I've seen that, so that's 2 different ways. The box down here goes one-on-one sessions. And again, when we talk about pricing, the coach now gets a piece of it. It's a whole different ball game versus you could have 10 people in this on-ramp, if we call it an on-ramp, and you're giving the coach an hourly rate.
And I think the other hurdle with that is, I've seen it done this way more often than most, is that those 3 sessions, those generally have to go into a fixed time slot now. And where that can be problematic is, what if that person can't make those time slots? So what I end up doing from a coaching standpoint is kind of bouncing around and trying to get this session in all sorts of different hours of the day that was previously kind of not part of my schedule. And again, that barrier for entry can be problematic. Now, if you run a morning and an evening session, then great. Yeah, it's a little bit more availability. But again, it goes back to your point just now, which was that I need to have more coaches for that at this point. So again, now it's a manpower issue.
Yeah. And, for a lot of boxes listening, you can have the manpower, but if you have a small space, so I see it happen at North Naples CrossFit, and I think they would agree. It's like they try to be flexible. You can come in any time, but a lot of times that's class time and I got the music blasting and the coach is trying to talk over that, even though there's space, or they go outside and now we go back to that experience. So yeah, depending on your space, that could be an issue. But would you agree that the 3-day certainly lends itself to your athletes being a little bit easier to integrate into classes?
I'm going to say a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I literally mean a little bit.
So, and that's why you go one day.
Yeah, they are mildly more prepared than they were after one day. Because think about how long it takes somebody to get acclimated to going into a class. It takes them generally a month to 2 months. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect that 3 hours with this person, they're going to be on the up and up on how things work. I'm not saying I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that more often than not, the 3 classes is not much different than 1.
So this far into the episode, if you're listening, what you're getting is it's not worth the pain in the ass it brings.
It depends, right? So again, it goes back to what does your business look like? Do you have one coach who's dedicated to this process and that's all they do? They are the athlete intake person. And you've got a business that facilitates paying that person, and there's a very smooth process, and somebody handles that person's the sales portion, scheduling it, getting it done, and then them graduating, then I think it's great. But if you're tossing this function to people at random, then I think it's problematic.
So I mean, this is a bit of a tangent. I guess my question would be, would you have someone on your staff that couldn't handle someone coming in for their first day and hopping into class?
Say that again.
So in other words, you do the 1-day intro, basically, whatever you want to call it. All of your coaches are capable of now handling that person in the busiest class.
Okay.
That's your answer right there, is what I'm saying. So for me, to give an example, I had 20 coaches at one point in Albany CrossFit. And I realized some of those coaches were only on because they can only handle the 9 a.m. class, and that was their time. And then I said, wait a minute, that's on me. I don't want you on my staff if I'm afraid you can't handle my busiest class of the day. Right.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that about your coaches. They can handle that. Now, what does that mean to box owners and what does that mean to the coaches listening? They need to be getting to that level that they can handle a new person along with 20 members.
I think a good way to think about this or assess yourself from a head coach or a box owner standpoint would be this. If you look across the class slots that you have and you look across your coaching staff, whether you want to admit it or not, there's probably one or two people in there where there's a gap. So all of my coaches are at this level and this one person is slightly lower than that. You have to assume worst case scenario that this new person is going to walk into that coach's class first day. So my job now becomes I have to get this person up so that there's not a ton of deviation between class slots and between coaches. Different flavor, not necessarily one person can't teach the snatch, but everybody else can.
And that's tough. And that's just comes down to, going back to an earlier episode, the intern program, and then just developing your coaches. I think as we move from 3-day to 6-day, we're just going to see the same pros and cons over a longer period of time.
I think so. Now you might, generally what I see with the longer ones is there's a larger group in there. So they do them less frequently, obviously, but the sizes of those group can vary between, I've seen anything when people do it from 8 to 20 people in those fundamental sessions. And that's where I think you can see a little bit better retention because those people move as a group. So now Bobby and Sally have graduated together. They have some cohesion in that group about, well, this is my graduating class. Like, remember when we went through fundamentals and we graduated? So there's definitely some value there. The con could be the manpower issue. So the con could be on my end where I just don't have the hours in the day to facilitate that going forward. It's just one more class time. If you don't have enough coaches to run those two things simultaneously, it's just one more hour in the day that I have to add to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, really, as we go further, the biggest obstacle is going to get people to sign up for the future. That's certainly a challenge. I highly recommend paying to reserve your space. Don't wait for people to come back in 2 weeks and pay you. It's probably not going to happen. One of my biggest gripes with my coaches was always when they'd be like, hey, someone joined. I'd be like, cool, where's their money? Oh, we didn't collect it yet. I'm like, okay, they didn't join. Until they pay you, we don't have a member. So there was always that. But I 100% agree with you. Even now, what are we in 2019? I can look back and still see to this day people that did their, we called it a boot camp back then. We called it, it was our 12 day was a boot camp. And it was, like a graduation day. We would give out certificates. They would all still hang together. They do the competitions together. Those niches were created in those boot camps. So you're definitely growing your community. That's a huge pro there.
A huge pro. And again, I think that largely works for the boxes that are more mature. If you're just starting off and you got to pay bills, being super practical here, I don't think it would be responsible for us to pitch best case scenario for somebody who's just starting their gym. Like at some point, you just got to get people in the door and start coaching and understand that that's a less than ideal scenario, but you got to deal with it. Again, this is where the rubber meets the road. I got to pay bills. I need butts and seats, and I'm not necessarily up to par to coach these people. That's a real thing. So I have to have a plan with which to morph that over time. Okay, how do I improve this experience? How do I get athletes a little bit more prepared to enter the class? Chris Cooper, who you had on this last week, largely what they'll teach in Two Brain, because you and I have both been through that course at different times. The other way you can do that is kind of a prescriptive model. So that prescriptive model can look like maybe that person does the one-on-one session, and then from there I would prescribe what I feel is appropriate for that individual athlete. So if they come in and they're incredibly, let's go with the athlete that I really want to come in my gym. So let's say we have an athlete who comes in who would fall in the category of morbidly obese. So they're 300 plus pounds, but they're really trying to change their life. They've made a huge commitment to jump in. They come into that one-on-one session with me. We go through that. I I get my assessment, I get the picture that I need. I may tell that athlete, I think the best bet for you at this point is personal training until we're both comfortable for you jumping into the class. So that's another option. It's not class or nothing. It is another opportunity, again, kind of killing two birds with one stone, which is making sure that the coaching staff can coach the class effectively, but also potentially creating some other revenue streams for personal training for people that it is absolutely appropriate for them to do personal training.
Yeah, and going back to that, my boot camp 12-day program, let me say I had a unique space where I had a separate space that I can take them. I had plenty of equipment. I put on 2 or 3 coaches per session because they would get as big as 20. So if you're not ready for that, that's probably not the best idea for you. And I love what you just said. And I think that kind of, brings this to a head, as in people listening, they want an answer from 2 professionals, 2 people that have lived it. What is the right answer if they're listening this far into the podcast? I think the first thing we'd say is you have to assess, like you've said a few times. But what do you think? You're clearly doing that intro session. Is that the way to go these days?
It is for us now, but I would be lying to you if I looked 12 months down the road and said, hey, I think we need to change this. But again, that's what works for us right now. But that's because I'm generally the one who does all of those. I'm kind of the sales lead in the facilities at this point. If I remove myself from that position, we might revamp it. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if I were to start a new box, I'd probably do that 1-day intro. Like I said, they pay for their membership. I'd let the other coaches know. But the big picture for me would be I would be confident in all of my coaches to coach them on their first day of class. So that might be something these guys have to, if you're listening, really reflect upon. Does the woman or man that coaches your 6 a.m. class, is he capable of doing that? Or is he just super fun and energetic so people love him? But can he keep a new person safe while challenging someone that's been at it for 3 years?
And if you are in that position where you have to bring people in the door, again, to just give some super practical advice here, there's some things you can do to mitigate that, which is, number one, we haven't gone full deep dive into lesson plan, but you got to have a lesson plan so that you can have some means of facilitating those new athletes. The other thing that you could do, and this kind of goes along with scaling, the scaling episode, if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it. But I can have some standard scaling options that people have to graduate through when they're new. So if you come into my gym and it's snatch day, maybe it looks something like you don't snatch on day 1. Maybe it's a power clean instead. And we gradually work our way up to snatching down the road. So there is kind of this potentially hybrid looking version of this that you could put together where I'm not doing the upfront intros. I've somehow woven that into my classes when people come in, that they have to do this first and then they do this. The problem with that is the con is I have to figure out how to track that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you and I both love about CrossFit, and I think most of the people listening, something they love, is there is no right answer. You can listen to this episode and you can try every method we just discussed, or you can listen to this episode and say, these guys know nothing about it. I'm going to continue to do what I do. But I think a big piece of advice you're going to get is assess yourself, try different things, and evaluate if it's working for you. I think the best metric people can be looking at in this scenario is how long they're retaining members for.
Yeah, and generally, if you're going to lose them, you're probably going to lose them in 90 days.
So if you're keeping...
If you got somebody for 90 days, you're generally going to keep them for upwards to 12 to 18 months past that.
Yeah, and if they're not sticking around that long, I would definitely evaluate this again and figure out, is it because of how they were onboarded, how they were brought in? Anything else you would add to our discussion on on-ramps?
No, I think the big takeaway here, like you just said, is that I don't think there's a right answer. I think you have to figure out what works for you now based on those 2 major variables. What does my business need to have right now, and what can my coaches facilitate? And then you devise everything else around those 2 things. And then you need to revisit on a very regular basis, 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and if you have questions, if you're unsure, hit us up. Fern's running 2 affiliates and a 3rd gym. I've run 3 affiliates. I'm at a box right now that does do those 3 one-on-one sessions. So if you're like, what do you think I should do? We'll certainly give you advice. And we both have different plans for what worked. I still have that 12-day boot camp somewhere on my computer and the cloud out there, which I'm happy to share. But test it out and be developing your coaches.
Yeah, just keep working and keep revising it. That's the big thing, is just keep revising it, keep evaluating. Treat it like your fitness, guys. Like, again, if we want to circle this back to like something we all know, is it working? Are the athletes getting in a good experience? Are we retaining them? Is it facilitating the coaches being able to see and correct and educate, inspire, entertain when those athletes come onto the floor? Evaluate. If one of those things is not happening, ask yourself, is that a result of our intake process?
That's it. And we talked about this before. Ask your athletes, hey, if someone comes through, ask them what they enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy, take them out to a cup of coffee and find out what they liked and be willing to change. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made as a box owner, especially once I got a little bit successful, was thinking I knew everything. And I was a dummy. And in retrospect, that's the one thing I would have been a little more open-minded, listen to other people a bit more, and that's why we're doing this. So hopefully if you're listening, you're heeding some of this advice. I know we're leaving this episode as, hey, there's no right answer, but I guess the best answer is, the right answer is the one that works for you and your box.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, Fern, another good episode of Best Hour of Their Day. Like we said, though, if you do want to hit us up, reach out to us. We're happy to evaluate and give you some advice on what we think would be best for you. And if you have any topics you'd like for us to discuss, people you'd like for us to chat with, let us know. But if not, Fern and I feel like we need like a catchphrase to go out on, like Fern out, but I don't think we should use that one.
Yeah, I mean, like, Savon and those guys had land the plane, but we gotta find our own. We gotta figure out what that is.
I think it'll come naturally.
It'll come naturally.
All right. And until we find that, it's been great chatting with you, Fern, and we look forward to getting back on and recording our next episode.
All right, everybody. Talk to you then.